commissioners present. There are more than half the commissioners present. For you folks in the audience, I'd like to have you know the commissioners that are here, and I'll ask them to give their name, starting with Dick Fisher on my left.
Dick Fisher on his left.
Fred Chai. Frank Reed.
Sherry Holmes.
Joe Josephs.
Lisa Parker. Mary Fromans.
That's Tony. And the other two ladies at the table are Evie Walters and Vicki Elmeter. I'll declare the public hearing open and ask that anyone in the audience who cares to be heard or give us some input do so, coming to the table here in front if possible for them, so that we can better pick them up on the recorder. Is there anyone in the audience at this juncture who wishes to be heard?
Mr. Chairman.
Lisa?
Would you wait for a few more minutes before we...
I don't intend to adjourn just because no one wants to be heard at this moment, because I feel we should wait until those people who the snow may have slowed up can get here. Don, do you have anything to say? Don Smith.
He's got plenty to say. That's the team.
There's
Right there.
Mr. Chairman, let's let him think about it a minute. Can I bring up something?
Yes.
I would appreciate getting a sense of the commission where this is concerned, but I find that this arrangement and that arrangement very awkward, and I think in our future arrangements I would like to see a sort of a round kind of arrangement. I realize that the recording secretary, possibly Evie, need a table in front of them, a place to write, and that's kind of handy, but I can do without it. I've got a pad, and I would kind of like to get around
You then would rather be closer to the audience and involved a little bit tighter group.
I think it's less awkward, and people don't feel like they're being put right on the spot. I think might be all more comfortable for us and more comfortable for the public as well.
The main thing we want is your input. We'd like to know how you feel, what items you might...
I certainly agree with you. This is very threatening.
Yes.
Nobody wants to be the first one up there, and you almost feel as though you're on tape. I don't believe this is the
one of the
that you want.
One of the basic things is to have on tape so that we can go back and...
No, I didn't mean that. I meant that you choose your words very carefully there. I meant you just say something.
Well...
Anytime you intimidate Don Smith, for instance, he's got to be back.
Yeah. If you care to be heard from your seat, that's fine. All I ask is that you speak up so that we can be here on the tape.
Well, Mr. Chairman, could we kind of address ourselves to this, though, while in the future, at future meetings, we set it up that way?
Bill? Fred? Your opinions on want to set up different? We can change it.
What is it you want to do? You want to have it in a circle?
Sort of a round table sort of thing. Yeah, a little bit less formal, you might say.
Yeah, but I find it kind of comfortable to be able to write and take notes.
Yeah, that's true. And that would be
maybe you don't care to, but I kind of like to take notes. I took a lot of notes last
sure
night.
Do, but I've got.
Why don't we just go sit with the audience? And just talk back and forth with them.
That'd be great.
Huh?
As far as I'm concerned, just so we can get it down, so we know what we've got when we're done.
Well, in fact, what would really be nice if we have, if we're going to have this kind of turnout, is that we can frankly put another row of tables in and everybody could gather around the table. That'd be the best of the bunch.
Well, why don't we
Why don't we
try that?
try that
and
right now?
The excess
Fine with us.
overflow can sit.
Just move those tables right here and mix
And
it
the
back
chairs.
together.
Okay, no, we can get a little bit closer here. Okay.
Well,
Let's do it.
no, that's easy. Arrangement. Appreciate Nick's comment.
Thank you.
Suggestion. Would you care to have anything to say at this point? Would you please identify yourself so they just
Carl Reader.
thank Carl.
I imagine that most people that watch something like I am, they don't really know what's going on. And I would suggest that what you started in here should be carried a lot further into the extent that we ought to be made aware of the different problems that we're going to face in unification. And whatever suggestions come out of it, why put them here in group form like you have these others set up, so that we've got a choice to know a little more about what we're up against. We all have opinions.
Right.
We like to see other people's opinions to compare them.
This was a suggestion from somebody within the commission and was prepared just as something to give the folks who are here a chance to kind of look at it and bring something to mind that might pose a question for them. And enlargement of it is reasonable and I think can be done without too much trouble. Just takes a little working on it.
Well, if you got it even published in the paper, the problems and stuff that we are up against, then if you missed a few problems, somebody sure as hell draw your attention to it.
Mrs. Parker?
What do you see as some of the problems? You know, what do you think will be some of the problems with the unification?
Well,
You know, as
our
a whole,
main problem that is up to you folks in here is to see that whatever you work out is balanced. In other words, unification has failed several times solely because it wasn't balanced. Either factor, whether you're talking about the city or the outside borough, have been trying to get the balance in their favor each time. And I voted for it once, I voted against it once. And how I vote for it this time depends on how it's balanced and what shows up on it. But I think that is the most critical part of it, is to be sure that you're balanced. And neither the city or the borough has a definite advantage over the other.
Are there other
Mr.
questions?
Chairman? Yes. Mr. Reader, what, to elaborate on that balance, what kind of imbalance or what sort of things would tend to balance it or make it imbalanced? I mean, in what respect?
Well, what you've got right in here, number 3, there's a distribution of representatives. The number 3 looks like to me it can give the best balance. Now, whether your districts are drawn up a little better, they're on a true population set up on it, why something else.
I don't have that right in front of me. What was number 3?
Multi-member.
Multi-member districts such as we have now.
Single member.
Such as we have now.
Yeah.
Right.
How the districts are set out for population, I don't know, or set up. That is primarily what I'm referring to. That is the most critical part. Then the other part we need to know, citizens need to know, is what other type of problems we're going to get by merging. If you put it on a job basis, you figure out how many people you'll be saving. In other words, you're you're gonna be eliminating a certain number of jobs, that's what the job's for. And I don't think anybody objects to that, but people want to know what it is.
Well, there might be a few that object to it, the people whose jobs are going to be eliminated, but you're right.
Well, the fact remains that it's going to take about as many Indians, as they say, as it does right now.
Right.
There'll be a few chiefs and sub-chiefs eliminated, but not very many of those.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sheffield?
Carol, what type of districts do you see? Is it? I might have missed a point. I don't have the question in front of you. But what do you favor, the single or the multiple? The combination, is that what you favor?
Yeah.
Multi-member districts? Do you want more services in the area or less services? Were you willing to pay for more if there are more services?
I think that should be up to the people that are going to get the services. I really believe that we have not enough districts right now.
Which service, Carl?
I mean, that they should be broke up to where we have more representatives.
You're talking about for the legislative body?
Yes.
To break up of sections.
You have a closer contact with your representative if you're not too big.
Feel better.
Are you speaking of single-man districts, or where you have a number of people running from the same district, or?
A number of people running from the same district is fine. If you go into single-man districts, then you are getting pretty much political. I think you've got a better choice and you'll get better people in than having a multiple choice to vote on. In other words, you're voting for 3 probably out of 6 people.
Present multiple man district, except for the first time, the intent was that in no year you would vote for more than one person thereafter. This last election, the only reason that you voted for more than one was that they were setting up the multiple man district. Are you aware that previously where the city had at large that several times the majority of folks came from one neighborhood in the whole city council? You still think that's better than having single-man districts?
No, I do not. I think I misunderstood you on what you're talking about, your single-man district. Your breakup of our districts now. We have what, 5?
4.
Now, I still think those are too large. In other words, that if they were made into 8 districts or something similar to that, I think it would be more advantageous to the citizens. It might cost a few more dollars for salaries, but you people don't get much money.
Are you talking about having more people on the legislative body, say
That's
instead,
right.
say 15 instead of 11 or
That's
13 or 17?
That is right.
Mr. Shives. But in the people running from that district, you're saying you want to be able to select from, say, 3 or so. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, if you're going to have, say you broke this up into 8 districts.
Right.
And it's so divided, which probably probably wouldn't be right that you've got two running from each district.
Okay.
On to that. Now, regardless of how many were in the race, you would be voting for two. You could take your choice of those two.
I see, okay. Multi-member.
If they came up every year and didn't, there was no holdover, there would be.
Well, if you had two in there and you had a holdover over, you'd be voting for one each year, but you still have your choice of two or three to vote for. And the following year, or 2 years, you'd have a choice of voting on that again.
What district you live in? What section?
The north.
In other words, it's not section 4, it's...
Any other questions? Mr. Sheffield?
This is not on this question, but how do you feel about the 40% rule that boroughs had?
I'm not really sure I understand it.
Well, where someone has to get more than 40% of the vote. I'm not sure we all understand it either. And there was it has to be run out.
In the one election, and the top vote getter, even if he got only 5% of the vote, and there were
25 running.
25 running.
There is disadvantages to it. In other words, you can have somebody who's running, you could have your opponent could run in another man of your same capabilities and knock you down.
Yeah.
But going the other way, there's just as many disadvantages. It's over with when the election's over this one.
I just have one final question, Mr. Chairman, if I could. I don't know if I asked it right the first time, but do you favor, if your area, I don't know how I asked it now, Fred, in the first place, but if you want services, and I understood you to say that the individual should be, that it ought to be up to him, when I think you meant area, your area wants to pay for more services or have less services, or did you mean individual people in an area?
If services are required or asked for by the people, they should be voted on by the people that are in that service.
In the service area?
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to find out.
Mr. Track?
Do you have any thoughts about administration? Do you favor a city manager or a mayor type of operation?
I favor a strong man
Strong man?
with veto powers.
With veto powers?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I
Yes.
would like to pitch in here and say I don't see the necessity of having a full-time mayor. I think a part-time mayor, if we go and have a professional manager, there's no need for two top dogs. Maybe a part-time dog up there.
Would you mind identifying yourself for the tape?
Julia Ayers.
Joe?
Do you favor the system right now within the borough that has, you have your full-time mayor, and then you have Mr. Duncan, who is the staff director, who is a manager. Do you favor that, or do you still think that the mayor should be part-time in that instance?
Not so much the borough's method of doing it, the city method of having
The city and the borough are almost alike in their,
yeah.
setup.
Well, I think we should have a very strong manager. And the mayor is a figure, not a figure, but not a good term. Yes. But he does not need to be a full-time.
I would like to comment on that. The reason that I am for a strong is that most of you people are acquainted with our borough assembly. And what chance would a city manager or a borough manager have with that? He could not act the way he thought he should act in the best interest of the people. He'd be fired immediately. There'd be no way that could be done. Now, if and we ever do have unification, and the people quit their fighting back and forth on it, then it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But I've seen an awful lot of good city managers in other cities just get fired because they were doing what they thought they should be doing and told the council or the assemblyman that that's the way it was to be done. Because as a general rule, not speaking ill of my assemblyman or anything else or women, but they are not really qualified to tell a good city manager what he's to do. That's his business. That's what he's been trained for.
You would favor a city manager?
No.
No.
No. Because of the fact.
Because of the fact. But you would favor...
He get fired the first time he said something that they didn't like.
You would favor a strong mayor without a manager?
Sir?
Would you favor a strong mayor without a manager? Or would you favor a manager responsible to a strong mayor?
A manager responsible to a strong mayor would be fine. Because most generally your mayor comes out of the citizens too. He's not very well trained for the job. The man that's trained for it and has the job must have the authority, and not somebody watching that.
Mr. Chairman, that's almost a contradiction in terms, that a manager with a mayor, I mean, isn't it?
I can't see how you could have both myself.
What's strong?
All right. As the borough does, Mario, I call him a staff director.
How about administrative?
Or administrator.
Chief administrator.
Chief administrator.
It serves the same purpose. It's a professional manager, whether you call him an administrator or whether you call him a staff director or whether you call him a manager. He is a professional administrator.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Joseph,
ask Mrs. Ayer why you feel the way you do about the desirability of a part-time mayor.
What's more, I feel a professional manager is just that. He is a professional manager. He's had training for a city the size of it. He has experience. It's his job. This is what he has been trained for. Let's let the guy do his job. And I don't think that having a full-time mayor is going to allow a professional manager to do his job.
Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Froney.
Julie, are you aware that the city manager in the city of Anchorage is responsible to the legislative body and not to the mayor? And you prefer them responsible to the legislative body and not to the mayor, as I understand you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Mr. Smith?
Well, I thought it would be all right. I spent some time this afternoon going through the old charter, and I thought I'd go through and just elaborate some points that I'd like to express. And then I hit on all the things that you've asked for in your flyer. I prefer using the name Anchorage as far as the name of the community, and I think for legalese you've got to call it city and borough, but I think we need to retain the word Anchorage. I would prefer an assembly of 11 members or larger, coming from multi-districts such as what we have today, where you have more than one in a district, 2 or 3, and with terms probably 3 years. believe you should retain the concept of the ombudsman. In regards to the chief executive, I favor the strong mayor form with the being elected at large for a term of, I think, 3 years. And that I believe that in conjunction with this, you should have the chief administrative officer, the strong professional manager that would be in charge of the kind of day-to-day operations. The mayor appointing all of the department heads. These all subject to confirmation by the legislative body. And I believe the mayor should have veto power. I've already commented on the chief administrative officer. I think that's absolutely necessary in this kind of government to have a professionally trained manager at the top of the professional hired people in the government. In regards, this is a pet peeve when I was on the Charter Commission, but I would like to make sure, or hope that you'll make sure that the concept of emergency ordinances is very strongly written so that it's not something that can be lightly used by an assembly. I think they've tightened it up in the assembly as it stands now, but I think this provision in the charter should be fairly tough so that it's not just used willy-nilly at any time that they feel like they've got to rush something through. As far as initiative referendum and recall go, I like the way it was in the previous charter, and that was 10% for initiative and referendum. Recall provision a little bit higher. I think we put 25% and 20%, a little bit more to kick somebody out, but make it fairly easy for the public to react to changing your government. I think that the concept of nominating petitions to run for the assembly is silly. You only have to go out and get 10 names. I think the assembly should file a declaration of candidacy and state you'll run. As a benefactor of the runoff, I sort of want to say that I would favor the elimination of it, or maybe a lowering of the percentage, because unless you were going to, say, mandatorily require a primary in a general election campaign concept like we have in the state, experience unfortunately has shown that people just don't turn out for the runoffs, and you're not getting any kind of really an indication of people. See, I think either ought to eliminate it or make some kind of a change, such as just automatically having a primary in a general election local government. Something that's been really bothered me in the past, particularly with not only the local government apportionment, but also the state legislative apportionment. The people living out here on the hillside and the rural areas have been shortchanged every time we reapportion. And a good indicator of this, in my opinion, is the fact that if you look at the voter turnouts in the precincts in these districts, you'll find that we by far outvote areas of downtown Anchorage and like, for example, District 7, which is House District 7, in relationship to the House District out here on the hillside. Now, we by far outnumber numbers of people voting, and I understand when I was on the Charter Commission that there's a legal problem of being able to use something other than census data, but I would really like to see it take a strong look at whether or not you can take, in conjunction with census data, voter registration and voter turnout as a means of determining apportionments. And I question whether you can, but I'd like to at least look at it, because this area out here is way underrepresented as far as people. You notice we had, I forget how many hundreds more people vote this last local government election than voted, for example, in the Muldoon area, District 3. I'm not commenting on all the sections. I have a feeling that you're going to spend a great deal of time going through the past charter that we wrote, the second one, and so I'm not talking about comprehensive plans and some of these other things, but I favor it. Now, in the area of education, I hope that you'll set up at least a system like we provided for in the last charter, where we designated the seats A, B, C, D, and so forth. if you can't do it by district, at least do it by designated seats, because I think the school board needs to be, I think you need to be able to pin them down as to a seat they're running for, so that now it's just, as we all know, is more of a popularity contest at large candidates. Another area of legal problem, I'm sure, but I would at least like to express it. I think that it would certainly be helpful, I think, to an assembly if they could view a school budget differently than the way they do it today, and that is to be able to get into it with 2 or 3 or 4 broad categories rather than having to look at it just as one lump sum and give them a cut of $500,000 or agree with what they're asking. I think this could be done so that you could have your basic educational costs maybe in budget A and another category B and C, and then be able to pinpoint. You wouldn't give the line item concept to the assembly where they could go in and take out a particular project, but at least you narrow it down to certain areas and not touch the good old basic things that you need for an education system. In the area of finance, I believe very, very strong that the concept we put together in the last charter that provided for a 6-year program for public services, capital improvements, and fiscal policy just has to be in future charters. And I just stress very strongly, I think that's very important. Probably one of the most important aspects of the charter that was written before. I would also like to suggest that you look at whether or not you can require a centralized treasury so that all governmental activities relating to the budget monies are handled out of one central agency and then funded out to the schools and to the various departments on that basis.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment on that. I saw
Mary, let Don finish and hold our comment.
Well, I don't have very much more now. I'm through anyway. In the area of competitive bidding, I'd like to see that be very strong also, that competitive bidding be required for all goods and services in excess of, say, $1.500 or something, but they must go to some kind of competitive bid. In the area of services, I think it'd be simpler this time if you just forgot about trying to include any new services and just created a government like we've got today, kind of, and let the police and some of these other things come about in an evolution. And that we didn't make this concept very clear. And I think the people have to know that they're going to have a right to vote on it, and that they're going to have a right to be able to stop, say, an assembly that's beginning to try to set a service area up, and to be able to come back to some process. Now, I didn't realize this until today, but the provision that we had written in the first charter is the one I liked best, and this allowed a petition to be filed by the people in the area to be affected by a new service area, and they simply would go out and get 10% of the number of people that reside or that voted in the last election for, I think it was a minimum of 100 voters. And that would stop the assembly from creating a service district without calling for a vote. And I think something like that has got to be made or been placed in the charter and really made very clear so people realize that they're going to have an opportunity to vote yes or no on say, expansion of services or creation of new ones. I think other than that, that's kind of about all I have. That's all I have.
Unless, Mary, you want to go ahead?
Mr. Chairman, I think folks might like to know a little bit more about the centralized treasury that Don is speaking of. This last audit of the borough showed that while each month we fund the school district's budget to a certain amount, each month of the year we put in the same amount. And we've asked them to let us know what they really need so that we don't, in the last half of the year, have to go out and sell tax anticipation notes to get the money to fund them at so much each year. each month. All right, this last year, we went out and we borrowed money from the banks at interest to fund that amount each month that they say they need each month. But when we were audited, and they were audited, it showed at the same time that we had borrowed tax anticipation notes of $10 million that they had sitting, not drawing interest in banks in Anchorage, $8 million less 600 that they had, 600,000 that they were drawing interest on. And this is the reason we say that we must work out of a central treasury, so that we aren't going out and borrowing money and they're letting it sit in the bank without interest to amount to LD.
I have a couple other points too that I forgot to mention, if you might, just real quick. Another pet peeve of mine, and I don't know how, I dislike very much the fact that the borough government spends money to promote the election of bond issues and this type of thing. I don't know what you put this in the charter, but I just bring it up. It's something that bothers me, and I think it's wrong. Also, the big thing that really killed us last time in the charter was that little flyer that was put out by our friends in Eagle River, where they tried to give us a mill levy comparison after unification. And I would hope that the commission would consider having an accounting firm or somebody try to go through, maybe the borough, city, finance people get together and try to do some kind of an analysis and make some judgments as to what, mill levies might be like, because, they had it showing that the people out here in this area would be paying 30, almost, about 30 mills versus that time an 11.5 mil, and it just scared people to death when they saw this thing. It just spread all over the place. I think that helped defeat the thing more than anything. The only other thing, another one of my gripes is I don't think the borough ought to provide cars for employees after 5 o'clock at night. I just saw one tonight coming home, that's why I mentioned it.
Mr. Fisher, you had a question.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of points, Don, or ask you to clarify them. You mentioned designated seats for the school board, but you didn't mention designated seats for the multi-member districts. Would you be favor that?
No, I favor that.
You mentioned how would you like the chief administrative officer picked by the assembly? Or
No,
by
I think the mayor ought to choose his chief administrative officer.
So ratification by the assembly?
By the assembly. I think all top division people should have to go through it.
Okay. Incidentally, and one other thing, Don, thanks for reminding me, because I was going to bring it up, for us to get working on this cost analysis, and I don't think the staff of either should do it. I think we should get our own consultant in that regard. But you're right. Our report last time was too late. It was within 2 weeks of the election, and it just wasn't adequate. We really ought to get into that. Thank you. I appreciate that, Frank.
Ms. Holmes?
Don, just to go back to the service area thing we were talking about, do I understand you that you would prefer to have a vote of the people to stop a service rather than requiring,
Well, my concept of sort of the service area thing should be that, there's going to be some things that the assembly just is not going to run at any opposition. It might be a very minor thing, and by ordinance set it up. There's no objection. Maybe you don't have to go to an election. But I think there ought to be a provision so that, if, like in the first charter, if 100 people or more, a minimum of 100 people or 10% of the people that would be eligible to come out of that service, wish to object to something the assembly was doing, then the assembly had to put it on the ballot. There had to be a vote. And maybe you want to go ahead and automatically have a vote. I don't.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. Do you find any fault with requiring a vote for anything?
No, not really. I think that might be a really way to do it. But I think it's just the important thing is that people really be made to understand that's what's going to happen, so that they don't feel like they're getting anything shoved down their throat. They've got to vote for it before they're going to have it.
Sheffield.
Thanks, Ray. Don, there's been some discussion that if you have such as the borough has now, a full-time mayor and a hired executive borough assembly, or whatever you might want to call the governing body, have minimal staff of their own, so that legislative body gets the things that they're asking for and want, instead of taking what might want to be given to them.
No, I agree with that. I think, you've got to provide adequate staffing for a legislative body if they're going to perform properly. I think they ought to be able to have a secretarial pool or whatever it takes so they can do their job just like the other side of it.
Mary Froney?
I'd like to go a little farther into that centralized treasury bit. Right now, there is a bill in the legislature that would allow a school board to prevent a centralized treasury from occurring in a borough. And I think if you folks are interested in that money savings bit, you better get in touch with your legislators and say that you don't want to see that prevented, that you think it ought to occur without any possibility of its being prevented.
That's the law today.
But no, it is.
Does the school board have the right to just automatically turn down?
No, they do not. But it's being put in the law, in a bill that's in the popper right now down at the legislature. Right now, the assembly could do it if they wish to do it. And I have hopes that we'll do it shortly. But if they get that bill through down at the legislature right now that they're hoping to, they'll prevent us from doing it. And I think it's very essential that the people know where their money is going down the drain on this score.
Did you have a question? Would you identify yourself?
I'm Ann Babsky, the chairman of Area G Home Business Landowners, and my presentation won't be as impressive as Don Young's, but I think I represent, could be maybe more sketch, but I represent a good many more people, I think. We have 806 members in the hillside and foothills area between Dowling Road and Potter, from Seward Highway on up. And our concern up here has been that unification be affected at all. Our organization is divided. The majority of them, I would say, were against unification. Many of them are in favor of unification. Many of them that are against unification did not vote for you people. In other words, they didn't even go to polls. Many of them are waiting to see what happens, and then they're going to vote it down. In other words, I think we have a powerful group out here that can make this charter go or not make it go, depending on whether certain things are incorporated in the charter that they're willing to buy. They've been fighting that borough. I've gone up and represented over 500 or 600 people and had a considerable struggle to be heard and felt by the assembly. The mayor, in his infinite wisdom, vetoed something that went through, and now there's no zoning at all out there in G5. So I'm here to say that a lot of people out here are not even here because they don't believe in this. I'm still on the fence. I want to see what comes. The thing that worries them most is that services will be shoved down their throat that they don't want. Services will be included in a service that one group wants or one area wants will be extended to another area that doesn't want it, and they have no way of fighting it. Now, for example, the fire zone that was needed perhaps in the O'Malley area, and there people wanted it, has been extended clear out to, what is it, Potter? Hughes Creek. A fire truck couldn't do them one, damn bit of good. And yet they have to pay that mill levy. And there's no way that they can go about removing that service so that they don't have to be included. Why would they include it? Because that mill levy is needed in order to support the fire protection. Trunk Improvement District number 14. The Campbell Heights subdivision wanted sewers, and certain other subdivisions in that area wanted sewers, fine and good. Why was it necessary to make Trunk Improvement District so enormously vast to include so many people with large lots that had no proposal to put in sewers, no wish to put in sewers, and they will have to pay for it? Now, the argument, of course, always is you don't have to put in sewer until a lateral goes down in front of you. Do you know a subdivision a little further up has people petitioning for a lateral, and up comes that lateral, and everybody along the way has to pay for that, whether they want it or not. And this is the kind of concern they have with having services put upon them without their requesting it. Now, unless some provision is put into the charter whereby people can veto services or can reverse this trend, which is almost like a snowball. You get a service and you can't get rid of it. You get another service and you can't get rid of it. You get another service and you can't get rid of it. The group likes the rural way of life out here, and it isn't that you want to keep development out. You just want development to proceed at a rate that we can afford it, that the residents who want it, and so on. Now, Joe?
Yes. Some of the things that you mentioned are occurring under the existing system.
Right.
I'm not clear as to how unification, even given the worst assumptions.
Provision needs to be made in the charter whereby the people can be heard. And it needs to be very responsive to the people, or you're not going to have this group supporting it out here, and there goes at least a large bulk of the vote. They will come out to vote down the charter. They won't come out to vote for a charter commission.
Mr. Chairman?
Lisa Parker?
I don't understand why, I understand that there's the battle with the borough right now, but why would they not, why not come to the meeting, and why not say,
Because
why?
it's cold outside and it's snowing and it's slippery. Why bother? When it comes to a vote, a vast majority don't want it to begin with. So if it comes out to incorporate the kinds of things that would make and give them protection, Halo can sell it out here.
But if they don't like the borough, and they don't like unification, then what do they like?
The incorporation into a charter which protects for them the things that are not protected now.
Mr. Chairman, I think part of the thing that you're speaking to, Ann, is the fear that I have felt out here that the bigger, the less responsive, unless there's some guarantee that this proposed bigger unit will be more responsive than the smaller unit hasn't been. Why take a greater chance by enlarging it and making it less responsive? I think that's
a very, very wary
she's trying to say.
Ms. Angby?
Could I ask you what method you would suggest for ensuring that responsiveness? Is it along the lines of
I think that's your job. I don't really know enough about the writing of a charter, but it needs to be worded in such a way that we can be assured that our rights will be protected. In other words, we have voted for a second-class borough, not for a first class, not for a city, and we don't want the city type of government to drift out here.
Do you feel that something like a community council would provide
no
accurate access to?
No. we had a meeting to determine whether we wished to accept a community council type of thing out here, and almost everybody that came was a HALO member. And their response was, who needs it? We have enough work to do and enough meetings to go to take our time. And within the council, as it was proposed, the council is an advisory group, which advises is not necessarily listened to or accepted.
And in one of the questions that was asked last night, someone said, well, if I live in the middle of the city and opt not to have fire protection, is that my right as a taxpayer to opt not to pay for that service and therefore not receive it? Somewhere between, it seems to me that somewhere between government has responsibility to provide X number of services to X number of people, and these are the services, and the people have a choice about what they are. There has to be some medium ground, and I don't know what that ground is that would be acceptable to HALO. Can you enlighten me at all on what does that mean, that the service area has veto power over the assembly? Does it suggest that what Don mentioned that was in the first charter that says if you have a petition of 100 people or more, you can stop a service from being extended to your area? What we need, I think, to be able to fulfill what you're requesting is a handle on what tools the government would have to be responsible.
What Don has suggested is a possibility, yes, where enough people can say this is what we do or we do not want. Now, who decides that a certain service will be offered? I think the people should petition or tell the assembly or the government that they wish this sort of service to be considered. It isn't a case of somebody saying, we'd like to have police protection out here, and getting heard by a governmental body, and then all of a sudden we've got police protection because 2 or 3 people had enough influence. We didn't even... I would prefer that it was either voted for or petitioned to initiate it, or some way that people have a voice in it.
You do basically, though, believe that if it were voted for in the area and it was a majority vote, 51-49%.
I would say that was a valid way of determining, but by the same token, I think that needs to be considerably more clarified as to what the people are voting for. We put out a flyer before the last election to our members, and we got phone call after phone call after phone call saying, thank you for clarifying this. We didn't know what the issue was. We had no idea what was the basis of our information. Mayor Roderick himself came to a directors meeting, in which there were also members who were not directors because it's open to members, and he explained each item to us, and then we reiterated to him, is this what you mean? And that's what went in our flyer. Now, the newspaper didn't clarify it that way. And that borough page, how many people read that borough page to determine?
The agenda page.
Yeah, the agenda page.
Mr. Chairman.
Right.
And do you think it would be a violation of the voters' right if any time people voted for services, it was identified to the land, if it were identified to the spot of land from which the vote came, it would be easily shown in what areas there were not 50% of the people that wanted it. Whereas if it's a blind vote, then you can gerrymander in districts that don't want it at all into a service area.
Now, I don't know whether this specifically would be an illustration of what you're talking about, Mary, but the recent sewer issue. It was stated in the newspapers that the sewer issue involved a certain area here, a certain area here, a certain area here, a certain area here, a certain area here. Those are the ones we're going to consider. But that issue didn't state that. And by law, those sewer bond funds could be used anywhere. Now you read that. It doesn't specifically state that those spots in Sand Lake have to be served, and that spot near East High at Russian Jack Springs have to be served, and other spots have to be served. It simply was so the intention that it should serve there, that isn't what the voters voted on. They thought that that's where the service was going to be. There's nothing to bind the borough from putting in house improvement district number 14.
I think, Fred, regarding the charter, listening to you on service areas, are you visualizing a very specific charter rather than a general one?
I don't know, Mr. Chai. I mean,
When you say your group is opposed to unification, and you make a good point on the service
well, I'm
side.
not saying all are. Here's a director that's very much in favor of unification.
What other points do they see as pitfalls in the charter? You mentioned the service area. What else? Form of government, or what else?
Well, we did not discuss form of government, so I can't speak on that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a question?
And would your group be willing to work with us as we go through drafting the charter?
Appreciate that.
I think what we're afraid of is that people will come to the public hearing and they'll say, okay, we've said what we want, now you go write it, and after you've written it, we reserve the right to tell you you didn't do it right at the polls. We hope that, I think I can speak for the commission, we hope that that won't happen, that we can have a dialogue ongoing, and I think HALO's one of the groups.
We could have a directors meeting at any time and any place, as long as it's Tuesday night. And we would have about 20 people that would be there, 10 directors and then 3 officers, usually chairman or president.
The other thing is I envision a good public information campaign as we go along writing to inform the public what we'll be working on the charter each evening that we meet, so that people who are interested, for instance, the night that we're talking about service areas and writing it, can come.
Yeah, this would give us an opportunity to put information in our flyer without having to wonder what the information is.
Mr. Chairman? Sure. I'd like to ask Mary something, because this the bigger government bothers me, and I'm not so certain unification results in a bigger government. I visualize it as resulting in less government because it got rid of one or two of them. In fact, we got rid of both of them.
Yeah,
replaced it by.
You're getting rid of one, but not out here.
If you live in the city,
if you live in the city, you have 2 governments now.
Yeah.
So you'd be getting rid of one, so that simplifies it for you.
Right.
Excuse me, I shouldn't have been.
Okay, no, that's fair. So I see what you're saying. So out here, we've only got one now, and
it's a smaller one than the big one you're picking.
Okay, big in terms of what? That's what I'm trying to get defined here.
Right here. That is a question I'd like to have answered very much too. We have the 2 form of governments now. If we go into unification, what is the city going to be? Just another service district, or a series of service districts? How is this going to be worked out?
Yep.
Now, Don brought up a lot of things that I never thought of, and I agree pretty well with him on that. And the other people who spoke here have brought it up, and that's what I'm trying to get across to you people. That if you get that down in the written word so we can see what it is, I'm not fast enough on my feet to absorb all he said that quick.
There's some of the rest of us aren't either, so we're going to have to absorb it over a period.
To make a decision.
Right. That's the way we wanted these things around, so we could go back to them. And I'm not sure that I could answer you at this juncture with any firm
Well, I think
statement.
that's just one of the questions that people are going to want answered. And talking with Mrs. Dan here on the question of service districts, sometimes I'm on her side of the fence, sometimes I'm not. But there is a policy in many utilities outside where if this area here wants a gas line or a water line or a sewer line or whatever it might be, and this area in here doesn't want it, then it's up to this area to pay to have that line run through to them here. Then anytime anybody ties onto it from down here, they're willing, able to tie onto it if they so choose. But they're going to pay the full cost of it, or their share of the full cost of it, plus the interest up to date, whatever they carry, before they can tie on. That looks like a very logical solution to work out here on utilities. I received a check after I've been up here for 4 or 5 years, where I paid to have some run in. People finally tied onto a gas line, and I got a check back.
Mr. Chairman, could I pursue my thing a little bit about bigness? You know, Ms. Babsky, you said we out here don't have it, but you know, I don't feel that way about it. You know, I work downtown. You used to work downtown. I think, are you retired now?
No.
You still work? You're working downtown?
No. I work out in Halloween.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
You used to teach high school. I know when I went to high school. or am I telling tales out of school? But you know, I don't. You know, I think we're going to get rid of some government around here with unification, and because I feel as though the city is very much a part of me. I'm not so sure I like it sometimes, but it is. And you know, I work there, and I'm really affected by it. You know, the parking garage downtown really hurt me, and in a financial sense hurt me, particularly because I own some property downtown. But that's interesting what you say about it. That really caught me up short, because I don't feel that I'm not a part of the city, even though I happen to live outside the city.
Well, some of us go to the city very seldom.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's maybe a basic difference in approach. You know, I don't think I can ignore the fact that the city of Anchorage exists, and I mean, in any way I can't ignore it. It's right on top of me all the time. And the bigness question, that's related to the bigness question, because I'm not so sure that new unified government's bigger. I'm kind of inclined to think it's smaller.
Well, of course, I didn't say that. Mary said.
No, Mary said that. That's right. Now, I can't get Mary to say anything.
The feeling that I have received from many of the folks out here is that they do feel that a unified government would be more cumbersome than the present borough and the present city.
Okay.
And being cumbersome would be less responsive. And the idea is that I have been hearing, and I was trying to reflect what I had heard to see if that was what she was trying to say, was that there is a feel from at least a number of folks out here that if it is one, there is even more impetus to grow like Topsy. But I don't know that that is true. I was trying to find out if that was her feeling.
Okay, well, this is something we've got to work on.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Joseph,
Since I'm talking to a teacher, I be pedantic. I think
My
Shakespeare.
husband is a truck driver.
Well, I'll persist. I think Shakespeare talked of bearing the ills we know rather than choosing ills we know not of, and I think that's what you're really saying, that the obligation on the Charter Commission it is to recognize that the people, many of the people you were speaking for, who are unhappy as can be with the government they have, many of whom voted against the Charter before and are still unhappy about the government they have, would rather bear the ills of that government than fly to others that they know not of in terms of a new government. Is that right?
Yeah, to give you specific case in point, we have just paid $7,300 to win a lawsuit. We got $2,300 back. This was against the borough about some zoning that was out here, which meant we're $5,000 out of pocket, which we are gladly out of because we won. We have felt as though they will be a little more cautious about zoning in the future. I mean, if you can write out the ills that we fear, then we've got it.
Mr. Sheffield?
Well, I think it's not only our job as members of the Charter Commission to write the charter, but we need the input from all you folks. And without your thoughts all the way through these things and answers to our particular questions and input, we're not going to get that done. It discourages me to and maybe I misunderstood you, but it discourages me to think that the people up here would go to vote no if they didn't like it, but if they did like it, they wouldn't go vote at all. And that bothers me. And
she didn't say that. She didn't say that.
You didn't say that. I thought you did. That they would. Well, if they're against it, they're really going to go out and vote no. But if they're in favor, they might not bother to vote.
Oh no!
And this bothers me.
If they're in favor of it, Halo can be convinced that they're in favor. We can push for it.
You can get the vote out.
There's no problem there.
I see.
But if it's vote, you can get it out.
Well, I think that's well.
Yeah. One point that I didn't meant to make is that the distribution of representatives, they essentially preferred the single-member districts because of the feeling that for a candidate to cover a large district costs a lot of money. And almost invariably, the guy that spends the most money is the guy that gets elected. You just take a look at the amounts that people have spent and whether they got in or not. Almost invariably, the ones that have spent the most money. Well, some of these little people don't have that kind of money. Now, Mary, for instance, we had to work like dogs to get a little person in, and we really feel as though we have a good candidate there, a good assembly person.
They were a set of spans. That's why she's trying to tell you.
Now, if they're also member districts, there your cost is increased again. And I'll clue you that if you make it member districts, Hale will vote 3 persons right here each time. Now, I don't know what Sand Lake is going to do and what Muldoon is going to do, but District 4 is going to have 3 people from here. In other words, we're willing to work out here. I think that the amount of money that it takes to get in is so overwhelming, so stupendous, that you're going to have people that can get the most money together, the most scratch together in office, and that is not necessarily the best person.
That would work better than put it in 8 districts instead of 4.
Single-member districts is what, I don't think that needs that. I don't agree with this. Halo has not. We have not discussed how many persons on the assembly. But if you get it too cumbersome, you don't get the work done. Your hours are going to be longer than ever. By the time everybody gets a chance to say.
Mr. Josephson?
That is not something we discussed. How many?
I'm not asking you for your organization's position, but just to, I'd like to ask you to reflect on this. Is it possible, though, that in terms of the influence of groups like yours, the influence would be expanded if you had a multi-member district, because you would have obviously a greater number of assembly persons who would know that you were, part of their constituency. In other words, you think that you have the same access to someone who was not one you were eligible to vote for than if you were voting for people out of a multi-member district.
For instance, Chuck Evans lives way over. Hopefully he will listen to us. I think he will. We have good... I was almost the same feeling, but I'm going to change it to hope.
Our transcription has trouble with that kind of
But he doesn't know the area. He doesn't talk every day to the people in the area. And I think that he would be better off if he could listen to his people rather than spend his time listening to Sam Lake and Area G and Muldoon. Right now, for instance, Sand Lake doesn't have an assembly person actually from their district. Because Chuck Eddy is down here. And I don't know if that's pointing in the right direction or not, but Harry is from right here. So we have 2 of them. Single-member districts. Make it a lot bigger.
Are there other questions?
Those are the only points that I specifically want to speak about, but if there's any other questions regarding other points, I might be able to speak with the organization. One person or Mrs. Lawyer, or Ayers, or
Are there others in the audience then that would like to be heard?
Like Mrs. Babsky, I would like to invite questions on any topic. My friends know that I'm sufficiently opinionated to have an opinion on almost any question I care to ask. I think the one thing you might want to keep in mind, and the way I phrase it is keep in mind the great variety of people for whom you are writing a unification charter. When I first came to Anchorage, our firm was acting as plural attorneys, and I helped take fees a fair amount, writing some ordinances which have lasted a fair amount of time and are universally unpopular, such as taxation. And it didn't really come home to me. You know, I used to sit and say how horribly inefficient second-class borough is. I was living down L Street. I was working on 8th Avenue, and sewers were an important and popular topic in those days. it seems sort of inefficient that Muldoon should be stewing in its own sewerage, and somehow we had to persuade a majority of the voters to recognize the fact when any idiot should know that it was necessary to run a sewer out to Muldoon. And then I had occasion one time to, on borough business, go up to the upper end of Eagle River Valley, and that was very educational. I hadn't been there more than 15 or 20 minutes, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was visiting in the home of an individual for whom the subject of municipal government was about as alien as the backside of the moon. This individual was very, very sensitive to paying a tax for borough mayor's salary, and he was very, very sensitive to paying a tax for planning and zoning. He felt he was very, very far removed from the impact of planning and zoning. We don't have Eagle River around anymore, but I would encourage those of you who go down to Alyeska from time to time to spend a little time up in Indian Valley or down the Bird Creek, go on down to Portage, go up Golden View Drive and up Homestead Road up towards Stewart's Place, visit around some of those places, and just keep in mind that you're writing a unification charter for them. Because the people who need it worst of all are the ones who live on the south side of Fireweed Lane, looking across the street at their neighbors on the north side of Fireweed Lane. And that's where the two governments become an absurdity. For the people who live in that area of the borough, which has only the general borough area-wide taxation, these people have got unification. They have a mayor who is their only executive, who is voted on by everyone living everywhere in the borough. And the affairs of their government are regulated by an assembly, which for them is the Unification Assembly, representing all areas all over the borough. And as far as structure of government is concerned, their government isn't going to change any bit at all. This is something, of course, that most of them don't really realize. I think Joe hit the nail on the head with the known fears versus the unknown fears. I disagree with any concept that the new government, the unification government, is going to be a bigger government to these people, because they're going to have an assembly derived from the same place their assembly is presently derived. They're going to have an executive derived from the same place their executive is presently derived from. And the fact that assembly is beset with the municipal problems that used to be the city of Anchorage isn't going to affect the fact that it is still representative of the same areas of interest as the present. The point Ann was making concerning the attitude of the voters out here, though, as neatly summarized by Joe, I think it's the very real problem. The Hillside Rabbit Creek voter is not going to get excited about the concept of unification unless it's put to him in a form which will damage the interest of unification in the city. If you put a ballot proposition on the ballot out here, resolve the city of Anchorage will be abolished tomorrow, it would pass overwhelmingly. And that is, I think, true. And it represents, a fear of boys downtown, so to speak. And really, for the rural voter, unification is nothing more or less than the proposition resolve the city of Anchorage shall be abolished tomorrow. Right. And there's no reason it can't be sold out here on that basis, because, of course, it would be able to see downtown votes. And you aren't ever going to be able to sell it on the basis that it isn't going to be any worse than what you've got now. really no reason to vote no, that the thing is going to be equally bad with what you've got now. That's no logical reason at all to vote no, except as I read the psychology of the voter, he doesn't want to be trapped into someone saying that he once voted in favor of those things which he considers to be bad. So if you want unification to fly out in Hillside Rabbit Creek, you've got to have a plus associated with it in some way. Now, another little anecdote about how service areas come about. Mary has a certain kind of cynics analysis of why it is that the folks south of Rabbit Creek up the Hugh Potter Creek Valley now have a fire department which is capable of reaching them after the house is burned down. Her analysis is that someone was concerned with the tax base that would be available to support the fire department. I have a fear that it was less rational than that. I asked Borough Public Works, one of the individuals who was there the night before.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the chairman be directed on behalf of the commission to enter into the contract as suggested by the attorney with Rowland Associates.
Second, call for the question. Question's been called for. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So,
Chairman, I talked with Mr. Rowan and looked at it, and I don't remember whether it stated how he was to be paid, but he needs some money now. Is there a clause in there? I think he wanted $5,000 working funds.
Yeah, the commission shall make the payment of $5,000 at the beginning of the project, and it has the maximum charge is $23,500.
And he wasn't quite sure how to go about that.
render the bill, we'll take it out to the borough, the invoice, obtain a check request, give it to Norm, sign it, and give it to Norm Levesque. That'll do it. Any other comments? Not, the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment. So moved.
Got a few I'll give you.
I have plenty, thank you. I really was surprised Muldoon didn't annex, and what concerns me is that as the borough gets more and more expensive, which it seems to do, that some of these areas will start annexing to the city, and the last thing I want to do out here is be annexed to the city. And no, that's the second last thing I want to do. The last thing I want to see is the O'Malley Rabbit Creek area holding the bag, the overhead, that all these other areas have accrued in the borough, and then they would escape by annexing to the city, and we are left because the borough would dissolve and go away. The other reason is, although I don't think this comes out sounding too good, is I really think the borough government as it is has a problem, and I don't know what it is, but in my little fire station episode, I talked to the mayor, one of the borough attorneys, the head of the public safety, head of public relations, and I think one other person, and I got 5 different stories. 5 completely different stories.
That was from 3 people.
I just get the sense that things are kind of on the verge of being out of control. So I look at unification as a way to maybe regroup and get a little better grip on what's going on in this community.
Very quite down person. I think right on.
Are there other questions? Story?
I appreciate that very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mary Foley?
and I think that perhaps you are among my friends out here that do not realize that the borough does have a professional manager. He's called a staff director in the borough instead of a manager, but he is exactly the same type of person that the manager is. The problem is that he's responsible to the mayor, whereas the city manager is responsible to the legislature. He is hired by the mayor and he's fireable by the mayor. He's responsible to the mayor. Whereas in the city, he's hired by the council, responsible to the council, and can only be fired by the council. But we do have a professional manager in the borough as well.
Which do you prefer?
Well, I don't know, there are good arguments on both sides, but I just think that the city of Anchorage has been recognized, nationally and so on, and the borough just seems to get worse and worse. Now, why that is, I don't know.
Are you aware, Ann, that this year that all of the borough funds are in the black, and quite a number of the city funds are on the borderline of the red?
No, because I haven't gone into it in great detail. I really haven't sat and analyzed the budgets and so forth. The borough has done things, and I'm not a tremendously vocal borough critic. I think you know that. I don't go down there and sound all to write nasty letters, but I have seen a time or two that the borough has really plunged into things. Well, like this fire thing was just one example, where we go ahead and do it, and then we figure out later how we're going to pay for it, and so on. I just don't think it has exhibited professional management, whether it is there theoretically or not. Okay, but I have seen better run organizations than
there was a fire bond on the initial election, and it went down. We put it back on the other one, knowing that this fire area would not have a station unless it was passed.
Are there other questions? Ms. Parker?
I'm just curious why you felt Moulton was going to enter the city.
Just thought so.
Are there other questions? Not? Thank you very much, Ms. Torrey. Sure. Identify yourself.
My name is Barbara Blum. I'm a resident of O'Malley Road. I do favor elected mayor who serves full time and has the veto power, and may hire his professional personnel. I do favor single member districts. I would feel that if this method were taken as the method to go in regard to the charter, that the district should be smaller, say, personal District 4, and that the representative should be elected every 2 years. I think that the unified government should not be called the city or the borough or the city borough or the borough city. I think it should be called the municipality of Anchorage or the Anchorage municipality or just plain Anchorage. I think that the residents of a community should vote for the extension or the reduction of powers in their area. I do favor the service area concept and studied it in great detail at the time studied the charter and the state document several years ago before there was such a thing as a borough. I do favor the second class type a form of government. I don't think that you can pass a charter unless you write one like that. Whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing for the city of Anchorage, I think that you have to do that. I don't see that it's impossible to solve the problems regarding the city of Anchorage. You should be able to do that with the use of the service area concept. I think that services should be instituted by petition and then subject to vote. I think that services instituted by the governing body should be subject to vote. I'm sure that there will be exceptions to this when they are not of major concern. Anything that applies to me and my 5 acres is of major concern. In 1960, I spent a lot of time studying the City of Anchorage's 1980 plan, as did a lot of other people who resided here in the foothills at the time. We were thoroughly frightened of that document because we did not care to, at that time or at any time in the future, be citizens of the City of Anchorage. I still have that document, and I have seen almost everything on that document come to pass, with the exception of I am not yet a resident of the City of Anchorage. That was not a very popular document in this area. Many of the people that that document was not popular with also voted against statehood. Many of the people who voted against statehood voted against the borough form of government, and in the previous elections, those same people voted against unified government. I think that the message there is that many people want less government. And if you are not responsive to that as a Charter Commission member, then I think we're all going to be in the same problems that we've always been in before. I think that is the main concern. I have always opposed unification in the past. If this charter were properly written and assured me that there would not be more government, I probably would vote for it. I favor a central treasury. I'm quite concerned with the problems of the school district, and part of the failure or the lack of credibility of the borough, I think, has to do with the problems that we have with the school administration. I feel that we must solve some of these problems concerning the position of the administration of the schools. I don't know what is the proper way to go about doing that and still be able to pass the charter. In regard to taxation, I think that many of you are aware of the fact that large lot owners in this area are forced every year to sell a portion of their property in order to pay their taxes. I've been told by an attorney in the city, who's also been a member of the APUC, that if we were such damn fools as to come up here and live on large lots, then we need to be in a position now to pay the piper. But I also have reminded that gentleman on many occasions that when we came up here, we had no telephone, we had no Chudash. We went without a lot of things in order to have what we were willing to work for. Now, in our instance, it's only 5 acres. Many of my close friends, it was homestead size. And their homesteads are dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. I don't know what the answer to this is, but I do think that taxation, there has to be some responsiveness to that person who is willing to still hold on to a large parcel of land and is still willing to pay taxes, reasonable taxes, in order to maintain their particular style of life. Again, the issue of the sewers is one that it's very hard for us to get away from because of all of the services that you're going to be speaking to. That's the only one that really concerns me. You can't really do too much with fire or police or planning and zoning that are going to rattle my cage very much. But all you have to do is write one wrong word in regard to how those sewers are going to affect me, and I will do my level best to get out every vote on this hillside to oppose that charter. The reason that it becomes very personal is, and I don't know whether a charter could ever speak to anything of this nature, but the size of the Trump improvement districts are something that I feel is rather inequitable. Brookwood subdivision is located on mile 1/4 on Huffman Road. Our property is located mile 1.5 on O'Malley Road. Brookwood subdivision suffers a problem. They need a sewer. I live in an area surrounded by 5-acre tracts which have not been broken up, have not been subdivided. And I do not have a problem, nor am I going to create a problem for my neighbors, nor are my neighbors going to create a problem for me. But the moment that Brookwood subdivision is served by sewer, I will be in the Trump Improvement District, subject to all of the fees of that improvement district, even though I may not be served by that sewer for 15 to 20 years. And I feel that that is unfair and unequitable. In regard to runoff elections, my husband and I would cancel out each other's vote. He thinks that if somebody wins an election by one vote, they should in fact have won that election, and he shouldn't have to pay another dime to support another election. I don't feel the same way. I am concerned in regard to things like contractual agreements that you will have to deal with in regard to both the city and the borough. And I don't see, as Mrs. Lowry felt the same way, how you can even begin to say that there's going to be economy, at least not initially. If you will write something into that charter that says that there will be a certain reduction by natural attrition, then I probably would believe you. Maybe. And in closing, I think that you all probably have ahead of you a very thankless job with a lot of hours and a lot of people who will not appreciate what you do. Probably I might even be one of them. I do appreciate your taking the time to listen to us, and I hope that you will try to write a document that will be responsive to all of your constituents.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate your coming out. I think it does affect our views, maybe not individually, but totally the views are affected. I wonder if there are any questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Joseph.
First of all, I'm an optimist, Mrs. Block. My read's going to be slow. I'd like to know about your comment, more about your comment about the schools. You indicated that there was a problem, but you didn't elaborate on what problem you see in terms of school administration.
Well, the big part of the problem and the credibility of the borough government, as I see it, is the problem of the borough supplying the money for another almost municipal entity unto itself. It becomes very cumbersome. It becomes very it's just problematic in the initial makeup of the whole thing. I don't know that you can do anything to change that. I don't see. I, of course, have my own personal solution. The school district is too large. If it's the third or fourth largest school district in the nation, then it's much too large and much too unwieldy. And my own personal solution to that whole thing is very well. I would say that you would have to do one of two things. You would have to incorporate the whole thing under one governing body, or you should break it up into sizes that each complex is one school district and all of the elementary schools that feed into it. That, I feel, would be responsive to the communities. That also is something that would never happen.
Mrs. Terulewski?
Barbara, if I may, you made one comment that intrigued me because I hear it so often, I don't really know what it means. You said
I would support or would want a second class, but I wouldn't want a first class. Now, the way
A home rule is what I'm doing.
okay, the way the Borough Act is written, obviously we are talking about home rule now, but really the only difference between first class and second class is that in the second class, the people vote on powers. Is that how you see it? Is that what you were referring to?
That's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
The city of Anchorage, of course, is a first-class city.
Right.
If we're to have a unified government, I feel that it must be a second-class type municipality.
All right, but when you say that, are you saying that you mean the people would have the opportunity to vote on services, and that is your main difference?
Yes.
Because if there's more, I'd like to know what that is.
No,
That's real good.
Also, at the present time now, may I ask a question of Mr. Jalewski through the chair? Does the city of Anchorage at this time have, what powers does it have area-wide that the borough does not?
Of course, it is, as you know, in the whole function of utilities, other than sewer, which is area-wide. Then, in addition to that, there would be the port, the Fine Arts Museum, police. Can anyone help me? Are there others?
Fire.
Well,
Roads.
fire now, you're very close.
It's area-wide but not.
What was the other?
Roads, streets.
Roads and streets.
You talking about now or?
I'm talking about now.
No, right now.
No, there aren't any.
Parks.
The city doesn't have any area-wide powers now.
No, he's saying area-wide within the city.
You're talking about the powers that the city exercises within the city, which in essence could be area-wide, that are not now here. For instance, you have parks that you exercise throughout the area, so that would be
there's roads and there's police.
or
and there's
roads,
libraries.
police. Well, you already have libraries, but you don't have the port nor the Fine Arts Museum, and that was 4. Were there parks? Well, parks they have.
Your fire is not total.
No, that's correct.
Yes.
Well, then how, have you talked at all in regard to how you deal with these things?
We have not.
We're hearing first.
Oh, we really don't.
This is the first input set of hearings, and we've been doing housekeeping functions basically up to now, and hopefully this following week we'll start getting into the details. In fact, the Charter Production Committee will be meeting tomorrow noon. Had one meeting already, and we'll really begin to get into it tomorrow.
Would you like to make a comment on those areas, Barbara?
Yes. My own personal viewpoint would be that in those areas, I don't think the city should be deprived in any way of things that they now have. I don't think that they have exercised the vote and have decided to do those types of things. In many cases, I personally would want to have the opportunity to vote upon them. And I don't believe that those types of things should be area-wide voting. Like, for instance, if you take in regard to the port, which I would have no objection to support myself, because of the fact that I derive as much benefit from that port as anybody who lives in the city does. However, if it were put on a ballot, I don't think that my vote should be, I don't think it should be a total vote of the city and the outlying area. I think it should only be the outlying area who does not at this particular time have that power.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very, very much for being here and for being willing to give us your input. Is there someone else who would like to share?
I would. You've asked for primary interests of concern for you, and I'd like to bring out something that is of a major concern to me. several of your members have worked on this, and it satisfied Mr. Sheffield citizen input, and that's the comprehensive plan. I think it's going to be a neck and neck race whether you get your charter commission, your charter written before the comprehensive plan is passed in total or not. But I would be very opposed to a charter that did not include the comprehensive plan, whether it had been totally passed by the Borough Assembly or not. I would like to see it not only included, but means of making it work included also.
What was work?
To make it work.
Are there any comments or questions?
We've heard some other comments about comprehensive plans. What does your comprehensive plan include that will make it a palatable entity?
An awful lot of people, an awful lot of people. The staff has come out to us citywide, area-wide, and asked, what do we want? And we have put in what we want, how we want it done. And I know they're coming back to us now and saying, well, this is what we've done. I'd like it. And I think by the time the whole thing gets straightened around and everybody's had their say on it, it is going to be possibly the best way of developing. I mean, it's not just planning and zoning, there's other things too, libraries and health and there are bike trails and all this. And I think it's going to be about the best plan for the development of this area that would come.
Would you say, if I may, would you say that you feel that in the charter you would want to say that there shall be a comprehensive plan and it shall be this comprehensive plan, or would you? I don't agree with that. So you understand my point of view. I don't feel that in the charter you should be putting in legislation that should be left up to your legislative body or its commissions, which is what is happening now, is the legislative body and its commissions are doing the job that you want done. If you put it in a charter, amending or changing that charter or changing that plan might be very much more difficult than it will be through your legislative body. To me, it's something like saying there shall be a fire station at the corner of O'Malley and Old Seward Highway. That's not necessarily where you want it down the road a piece. It might be good today, but might not be good 5 years from now. I like your comment on that.
I see what you're getting at, and there have been other comprehensive plans put forth, and they have just flat gone down the drain. I would hate to see the past 2 years of work, four, excuse me, sorry, 4. I'll take all the years there, actually. 4 years of work just go the way the rest of it has gone. I'd like to feel that putting it into the charter, assurances that it would be.
I think this would become part of your transitional, perhaps, function.
You confused me a little bit. You mean that you wouldn't have in the charter that there will be a comprehensive plan, or that there wouldn't be in the charter that there will be this comprehensive plan?
This comprehensive plan.
Oh, well, there's a big difference.
Well, not necessarily. I don't really feel myself that you should direct a given function that is not that is taking away from the legislative body its prerogative to do something. Now, if you say there must be a comprehensive plan, maybe this area might say, we don't want a comprehensive plan. Now, that's not very likely. I don't think that's likely. But if you're directing in the Constitution of the United States that there shall be prohibition, it didn't work.
No, but I just still don't understand what you're saying. I mean, is it a comprehensive plan or the comprehensive plan or both that you're objecting to?
I'm objecting to putting anything into the charter regarding a or the comprehensive plan.
I understand your point. Sherry?
I'm one of the biggest supporters of comprehensive plans, having worked on the Citizens Advisory Group for years. Title 29, the municipal code, says that there shall be a comprehensive plan. Now, the only reason I could see for putting it also in the charter would be if you felt that the state government was likely to change their mind a few years down the road and take that out, which I don't see as likely at all. So then I think you maybe just come down to the question of this comprehensive plan or making it more specific than the state law. I tend to agree with Mr. Reed that I'm not convinced that it belongs in the charter, but we certainly need it in Anchorage.
I was just going to comment on this. Perhaps what you mean instead that we need some kind of reasonable time frame for you in which a comprehensive plan can be implemented. Not maybe specific this
Mr. Burton?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Holmes, I think you may find that that portion of the municipal code will have no application to this building.
Sure.
Because it says a borough?
No, because this is a home rule government. And every those portions of the municipal code which are expressly binding on home rule government are by amendment.
Our attorney's making notes.
He's already said that. Mr. Garnett and Mr. Burton agree. Getting into some point along the way.
May I backpedal a few steps then?
Well, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I still don't think you should legislate in the charter. I just don't think. I think that's the job of the legislative body. It should be done there, and it's more responsive to the day-to-day needs of the citizenry of the area. That's my feel about it. Anyway.
Mr. Chairman, there is the point, though, of not only of winning support from voters like you who are concerned about that, but of having a charter that puts people on notice as to what they're likely to expect. I think there may be some value in that. But I agree with your remark that it's hard for me to conceive how we could have a document that we would append as an exhibit or something and incorporate by reference.
Mr. Chairman? My comment was that I think we need to pay special attention to the transitional section. For instance, there are many things that are in the present sets of ordinances of the city and the borough that are desirable, and I think that's something I need to be informed on is, how do we bring these together? I just had occasion to work with some people that have been appointed to the new planning commission out in Eagle River and Chudiak, and it's a tragedy. They're starting out with a blank piece of paper. They even have to go through the process of having adopted the land use plan that we prepared for them and that many people support. So, I think you have a valid area.
Mr. Brony?
Mr. Chairman, I think that the lawyers better tell us as to whether we don't need to incorporate in the charter the methods whereby the proposed land use plan may be modified, the rules whereby it may be modified. If the 29 doesn't carry over, perhaps this also doesn't carry over to this sort of a government. And we better be darn sure that the method whereby a comprehensive plan is to be modified, the rules under which are included.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Garnett is preparing an analysis of Title 29 as we directed.
Quite right. Thank you. Are there other people? Mel Keller?
I'm Milton Keller. I'm also a resident of Section 4. And although it doesn't take me very long to drive to this location, and I think I might have been closer each time. This is more convenient to drive to. I have always enjoyed going to meetings where Ted Burton speaks, primarily because he has a knack for taking a very complex issue and oversimplifying it to the point of ridiculousness. In fact, when he mentioned, he referred or characterized the keys to the schools as being related to or similar to the King's jewels, or something. I thought to myself, maybe they're worth about as much after what we paid, but by the same token, maybe we could come up with a colorful characterization of Ted, like the Crown Prince of Halo or something like that. But anyway, his remarks, I think, are always enjoyable to listen to, and in most cases he tends to cover almost every issue. And especially I'm glad to see that he supported unification. There are several things regarding the charter that I'd like to speak to briefly because of the time. Some of the things that have been pointed out, this idea of two governments concerns me. I think I, living in Section 4, do have two governments to contend with. I believe all we have to do is wait until the revenue sharing funds are dispersed this year, and we'll find out that that other government is down there competing with us for those funds. We'll also find out that, for example, the fire service area, for example, that was located up here was enlarged because there was not sufficient tax base on the hillside to form a fire service area that could support itself. My understanding is that the same logic was used to incorporate all of the fire service, the separate fire service districts in the borough into one massive fire service district, so that there would be a large enough tax base that could support providing fire service to peripheral areas, a service that was greatly needed. And I think it's another good example of something I'm somewhat concerned about, and that is this idea of our involvement as a community here. I'm concerned with a great many more things than the 5 acres around my house, or would be if I had 5 acres around my house. I'm concerned about the north-south runway. I'm concerned about the central business district plan. I think all these things have dramatic impact on all of us. The fire service area is a good example where we are paying for two governments because the city of Anchorage has a complete, distinct, separate fire department. And I think that we out here now, we're all in the same fire service district, are paying a price for that. We're paying for a more expensive service than we have to have otherwise. So I think that we all are affected by these two governments, and there's a great deal of benefit that we'll get out of unifying the two governments. The other thing that I have fairly strong feelings about, and that is the form of government. I personally prefer to have the legislative body have the executive responsibility in the government. The city and borough are not alike.
I think they're two distinct forms of government. The characterization of removing the city manager is always used to show why or would appear to make it a point that only bad city managers show up when they are in a legislative government. I would say the case can be made for how do you remove a city manager working for a mayor who has the executive responsibility when the mayor doesn't want to get rid of him. He has to wait 3 years before he can replace the mayor. And if the chances of turning over a legislative body 1/3 of it every year, I would say the chance to remove a manager that you don't like would be much more possible under where the legislative body has the control over the manager. The extreme case that Ted gave is that if every single person on that assembly would not vote to remove the manager, you'd have to wait for 2 complete elections, and that's true. But I submit that the possibility of that happening is as remote as the possibility of the mayor not wanting to remove a manager who worked for him and being re-elected a second time. So you would wait 6 years to get rid of him. So to me, the government is much more responsive when that legislative body is the one who is responsible for the executive power, and the mayor, the manager, reports to him. Regarding apportionment, I prefer multi-member districts. And I think that I would like to have a chance every year to go turn over one of the people on that legislative body. I don't want to wait 3 years to turn over somebody. I want to be able to go down there every year and turn over at least one member of that body, or have the opportunity to do it. Single-member districts mean that it's a long time between elections, and if you get a bad person in there, you're going to wait a long time to get rid of them. Multi-member districts means that every year you can go down and turn at least one person over. In line with what Barbara said regarding the length of the term, I very much prefer or think that a 2-year term ought to be considered. I spoke with Ginny Klein from Juneau, who was up here, and I asked her specifically about that, they have 3-year terms down there, and I asked her 3. And I asked her about this concept of 2-year terms, and she said that she thinks that would be much better. And I since then have talked to several people who've served on the assembly or the council, asking them, or people who haven't served, but I said, if it was a 2-year term, would you take a shot at it? And they said, yes, I would, but 3 years is just too big of a commitment. So I think if we had 2-year terms, that means that this body is going to turn over even more rapidly than it would otherwise, and this concern about getting rid of a bad manager becomes much more responsive, or much more possible. In fact, the concern might be expressed in exactly the opposite direction, that you'd be turning over the body so fast, and you could be getting the people would essentially be replacing the manager too often, that you might lose some stability. Regarding the public opinion poll, which was on the ballot, I was very much impressed by the response that the voters gave to the support of the legislative body manager form of government. The vote inside the city was 61% favoring a manager responsive to the legislative body, and in the borough, or in the area outside the city, was 51%. So I think that the voters indicated at this point that they favored the manager form rather than the elected mayor, or what we'll call the strong mayor, executive mayor. I think that the legislative body should not be allowed to be bigger than 11 members. No matter what the Anchorage Times says, if I don't know whether it's possible to get a borough meeting over no matter who's running. If Henry Kissinger was running, I don't think we could get it over before 1 or 2 in the morning. Because you have to give everybody a chance to speak. And if you're talking about a 16-member body, or a 14-member body, or 19 or whatever, you're talking about long, long meetings, maybe more than 1 meeting a week, more than 1 long meeting a week. I can see a case being made for smaller, 9-member body or something like that, although I would prefer not to try to jeopardize the charter by putting in some radical concept like a 9-member body. Finally, one of the areas that everybody, I think, is concerned about is in the transitional provisions, and it's a very difficult issue to deal with because of so much uncertainty. And I thought, again, talking with Ginny Klein about the problems ahead in Juneau, the thing she expressed most strongly was not to make the transition too fast. They used, I think a 6-month transition in Juneau, and it wasn't fast enough. I mean, it was too fast. They needed more time. And in order to implement things, they had to do some things, cause some things to take place that did not end up in a very stable transition. She thought or suggested possibly a 9 to 12-month transition period. Well, I've wondered how the transition could be handled in terms of ensuring that this would take place and that the beneficial effects would take place in a logical sequence. For example, I see the adoption of the ordinances as being a crucial issue when it comes to talking about whether you like the comprehensive plan or not, because to me, during this transitional period, the legislative body is going to adopt ordinances of one body or the other. And one of those ordinances will be the planning and zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan, however that's a separate ordinance. And that's a time when that issue would be addressed. I'm not so sure. I think that what the state law says or what the existing borough law says has much to do with it. It's really how the new legislative body decides to adopt the ordinances that are in existence. Well, it appeared to me that the possibility of developing a steering committee to chart out the transition might be an easy way for the Charter Commission to kind of transfer its responsibility in this area over to some group that has an ongoing responsibility to see this thing through. And it appeared that it might be possible to appoint to the steering committee, and the charter might provide for this, that the mayor that's elected, whether he's the executive or not, I think the concept would still work, that he would be appointed chairman of the steering committee. On the steering committee would be 4 additional members. The 2 existing managers, in other words, Mr. Donahue and Mr. Whiteford, and the 2 personnel directors. Primarily because I think one of the big conflicts is going to be in differing personnel policies as to when you start making the transition and you now have 1 building department or 1 fire department. You've got 2 completely different sets of retirement plans and so forth. So I think maybe the personnel directors could provide some guidance in this area. The steering committee would be charged, first of all, with identifying those ordinances or those areas in which there is no conflict. In other words, the city has powers that are not being exercised outside the city. Like, for example, and could pass on to the legislative body a recommendation that the following ordinances can be enacted as they are without any requirements, and therefore that these functions could be brought under the unified government immediately. They would then lay out a structure very much like you've laid out with the Charter Commission, where you draw on other resources. The steering committee, for example, could charge one group of coming up with an integrated finance department ordinance, or an integrated public works department ordinance, or an integrated fire department ordinance, and the steering committee would meet on a regular basis. And the charter, I think, would provide for this, weekly or whatever, at which time the direction would be given to the 2 finance directors, the 2 fire department chiefs, and so forth, to come up with a plan which the steering committee would be responsible for and would then present in the form of an ordinance to the legislative body. And the steering committee would have responsibility for laying out the time frame. The charter would make this group go out of business. The one problem is that you might end up with an executive committee inside, an inside group that kind of kept going on. So the charter would say that at the end of 12 months or whatever, that this group would go out of business. And that, in other words, on their time charts, they would have to have that as the completion of their task because they would be gone. Also during this time, assuming that the legislative body had the executive responsibility, the appointment of the city manager could be handled in one of several ways. Either it could be specifically delayed, primarily to encourage the 2 managers to remain on the steering committee, and possibly give the legislative body an opportunity to see if they want to use one of the 2 existing managers. Or a manager, I can see a conflict if a manager was appointed that he would have to be involved in the steering committee as maybe a 6th member, or serve as the chairman, although I prefer the mayor because of the importance of the transition, that the mayor serve as the chairman. Because when he runs for office, that's one of the things his platform is going to be how I'm going to make all this happen, and so forth. The charter may specifically give him some responsibilities and a job description as to how he's going to make it happen. One of the concepts that's recently come into data processing regarding large projects is what's called top-down structure. And it's a fairly new concept, and it's a system concept, and it applies not just to data processing, but to the definition of any project. And it involves starting at the very top with the desired results and defining. In other words, the desired results would be we want 1 fire department, we want 1 public works department, we want 1, the way the service areas have to be implemented, and so forth. The various descriptions as to what it takes to, or what the immediately adjacent results that are required, in other words, their line of responsibilities, are defined at that level and defined in complete detail. The next step is to go one step down to the areas that are responsible upwards to these areas and define all of the things that are required to implement and support those functions. And the concept is that you go down about 4 or 5 levels, never going to the next lower level until you completely define all the responsibilities and sources of responsibility that exist at any level. And by the time you get to the bottom, you have your complete structure designed. The steering committee could use an approach like this, I think, to possibly implement its plans. In conclusion, just some general comments. I'm concerned that on this idea that the Charter Commission have the community's interests at stake. It's another thing that Jenny Klein said. In Juneau, they had a great deal of problem with local conflicts. The people in Douglas didn't like the people in Juneau and all the various areas. There were some really strong factions there. In fact, stronger than here, in that there were two cities, for example, Juneau and Douglas, that got thrown into the same vote, plus an area outside those cities. She said that one of the things they found after the charter was adopted was that a lot of these regional antagonisms, they started thinking about Juneau as a community. It had its, it had its diverse areas and so forth, but it was a community. They all shared a lot of the same common problems. For example, their schools cost a lot of money, and they needed a bridge across the channel or whatever. But anyway, they start looking at their community in a much broader range than just their little square of ground. And I think unless the Charter Commission can do this, it will end up with a very cumbersome charter again, trying to protect what the people in Muldoon are worried about, what people in Government Hill are worried about, and so forth. So I think we've got to look at the big picture, what we're trying to achieve, and realize that we're all in this together, and that as a community we should all have this interest of the whole at stake. The transition plan is going to affect the writing of the rest of the charter, because a lot of things you might be able to say, well, that'll be taken care of by the transition. And I can see possibly ending up making the job simpler by attacking the transitional problem first off. The commissioners have to help sell the charter. At the meeting a week ago, the question came up of fundraising, using public money to promote the charter. I don't think that's right. I think that the public, the money to promote, to vote yes on the charter and so forth, should come from the public, and I think it can be raised from the public. But I think the commissioners should be the ones who the TV spot is cut, that each commissioner has a chance to say why the charter should be sold, and the radio spots and the endorsements and urging people to vote for the charter, the Speakers Bureau and so forth. But in terms of the fundraising, I think that can be coordinated by a separate committee, which will have a responsibility to go out and try to raise the money in the community. But that each commissioner would take on as a personal evangelical effort to try to help sell the charter. I think everybody can't help but be impressed with the work that you've done so far, and the fact that the commission organized itself immediately, set its objectives, and started moving diligently forward. And I think, and I have no reason to anticipate that it won't be successful. I'm, I think, like Joe, optimistic, and that's the only way I think we can head into this thing. That there are so many positive benefits that can come out of this. My little boy has a peanut sweatshirt, and I can't remember what it says on something about how can somebody who's so sincere help, or what, you can't hurt somebody who's so sincere, or something like that. So, and I firmly believe the community is ready for it. The vote was 2-1 inside and outside. So I think the community is ready for this charter.
Are there any questions in this bill? Mr. Josephson?
Millet, I appreciate your remarks very much, and I wanted to ask you about the role of the mayor under your concept. You mentioned an elected mayor. You mentioned that one thing he might do would be to chair the steering committee in the transition. What else would he do? And would he be full-time, working with the manager?
The mayor would be full-time. He has to be full-time, I think. The mayor, as I see it, has to reflect the goals and aspirations of the community as a whole. He's the one. There has to be somebody who can represent the city on a national basis and on a local basis. And we're talking about calling this, giving this concept a term, and we're going to call it Anchorage or something like that, I hope. And I think we have to have a focal point that represents the community, who's elected and represents that, a political type person, somebody that we identify as being our representative, we as a whole. And his responsibilities, I think, will be in that area of doing those sort of things. There can be certain things, for example, set up and adjacent to that regarding planning or maybe development or environmental oriented or something like this, where he would serve in an advisory capacity. But I think definitely we have to have an elected figurehead mayor. Definitely the legislature, the administrative responsibility should be with the legislative body.
They here are the ones that hire and fire the manager.
Right.
And the mayor has no vote but a veto.
No veto. No. He's on the legislative body. He has a vote on the legislative body.
Mr. Tergalewski.
I was merely going to tell Philip and perhaps the audience, one of the things that we considered as we get into the writing of the charter will be that we will publicize next Thursday. We are going to be considering certain items. The public can come forward with an appearance request and speak to us that night, or wait till after the debate and be under person to be heard. But I personally would like very much to hope that Millet, I'm a great admirer of his ability, will follow through on this transitional thing, because I think we have some good ideas and I see a couple of problems. But I think that it needs debate. It's a concept that's worth considering, and I hope you'll put your ideas to that in some refinement. I think it's an area we're going to need some help, and it's crucial to the charter. So, welcome.
Other question, Mary Froney?
I used to work in Southeast, and I'm aware of Thane and Douglas and North Bay and farther out in relation to Juneau Thaw. But one thing that you need to remember in trying to compare Juneau-Douglas area with Anchorage is that our legislative people on our borough assembly represent as many people as are in the whole area down there. And when you try to say that a single-man district up here is very parochial, no single-man district that we have had has a unified, positively unified thought, because there have been sub-thoughts in any single-man district that has ever existed in Anchorage. They have the representation, even from single-man districts, have to look to what is good for the whole.
The legislative body in Juneau, of course, everybody votes on every district, and I don't think that would work here. It will work there because it's very small and compact and so forth. I don't think that concept would work here because of the cost. You're looking at everybody having to run an area-wide campaign. But I think, Mary, you're a good example of the fact that if you have a good candidate, you don't need a lot of money. And a good candidate has to have a good organization. And I don't think that even if you have a whole bunch of little tiny districts, the guy can still go on television.
I wouldn't have had a chance area-wide the first time I ran.
That's right. I'm not in favor of area-wide. I'm in favor of multi-member districts.
I would not have had a chance, even the multi-member district, because of the cost.
I don't agree with that. I think that you're stronger than you give yourself credit for.
I wouldn't have the first time. I'm not saying I didn't have this time.
This is an area of concern for me too. Now, for example, her district in a situation, she's Sand Lake and she's also all the way over here, and it is rather a big area kind of thing.
The only way that the hillside would ever get a representative that represented just, the constituency that you generally think of in terms of the hillside is to have 15 or 20 districts. Because even under the 11-member plan, you still had Ocean View.
Still had City Park.
Right. So in other words, you've got to bring in areas of high population, even to get 11 members of your district.
I still had Portage. I still had out there.
The only way that you can do what you want to do, have a small district, neighborhood district, is to have a whole bunch of them.
Well, see, if we're a single member, you could divide it by 3 at least.
Are you in a three-man district?
I'm in a three-man district, and I have half of the geography of the borough.
But you can't have one of those three districts being the hillside, one being Sand Lake.
I hear what you're saying. It would still have to be a fairly substantial area.
You see, presently, with the multiple man district that they have put me in, I represent half of the geography of the borough. And that is too large to spread signs over. That is too large to advertise over.
See, but you are
anything
living
but a mass
testament to
meeting.
the fact that you don't have to do that.
But I couldn't have done it the first time. I wasn't well enough known.
I think you could because you had a strong organization. So.
Are there other questions of Mr. Keller?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? Mr. Keller?
Yes, certainly.
I'm very interested in your transitional approach, and I think it does have merit. But you speak in terms of the city and their utilities and how they are not stretched outside the city. Now, telephone is the case in point of where they are. The city provides all of our telephone service. Then you talk in terms of municipal-like power, and how do you see any kind of an agreement ever coming between them and you guys?
There won't be, and the charter won't do that. The telephone actually is a good example of why there are two governments affecting us, because you pay and I pay the municipal utility for that telephone, but they take the profit that they're making off of us and put it back into their budget.
They put it into the general fund,
Right.
and then they make their people within the city pay for bonds or support bonds separately, when actually the telephone utility is the one thing within the city that does make money.
Well, all the utilities, they all make money.
They're not.
They're
revenue bonds.
There's no ordinance in the borough regarding the telephone utility or the electric light and power. So all the laws that the city has regarding how those things are to be run and regulated and so forth don't conflict with anything in the borough, so they could be enacted just as
Well, that was another question that I had in regard to what about the existing laws of both municipalities, and how do you go about, what do you do? What does the new legislative bodies do? Do they go through each and every one of them and decide which have no conflicts, and they accept those, say, across the board, and then they start with the ones where there are conflicts, and those are no longer law, and they go from there, or what happens?
The legislative body has to take action, and that's what he's talking about, identifying, and then the legislative body, well, I'm sure, would be the one in power to supersede with new or to adopt one.
Well, is anything still lawful once both unities are dissolved?
It's what that year of transition or whatever it is should take.
I understand that that's what the transition is all about, but once the voters, if they do in effect vote for unification, legally, what is the status of all of the existing ordinances?
They all remain
They all,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mary Coney.
for that transitional period until something takes place, don't the present ordinances hold until something supersedes it in the city, and the present ordinances that are affecting the borough hold until something supersedes it? I believe that's what the answer
Basically
you're
right,
wanting.
except where there's conflicts, I assume that there would be something in the transition.
Well, it'd be during the
Regarding
transitional period that some action would be taken by the new legislative body to supersede the previous two that did. But in the meantime, one would apply to one and one would apply to the other.
Mr.
Chairman, the problem that Jenny Klein spoke to in Juneau was a problem that the last Charter Commission was aware of, because it happened prior to the time of our writing the last charter. And their problem was only that there was a requirement that the new ordinances be adopted and the new government be organized by such and such a date. And, it was the guillotine was falling. And so we knew that, at least when we wrote the transitional provisions in the last charter, and we didn't have a guillotine falling, and we just said they remain in effect until such time as the new government chooses or acts. And so that is the primary problem, and so it isn't a problem anymore. But Juneau did have a problem. We were aware of the problem last time and spoke to it. Mr. Parsons?
I don't know who can speak to it, and maybe we will have to take the bull by the horn in this regard, but I'm deeply concerned about the division that seems to exist in philosophy over single men versus multi-member districts, and I'm not sure how we're going to handle it in an equitable way so that we can accomplish what I hear here, and that is that government be kept close in terms of a representative, and at the same time not have an unwieldy kind of legislative body.
I'm sitting here thinking the same thing. If we're talking in terms of 11 men, regardless of what happens, the districts are going to have to be large.
Someone has suggested that perhaps there be 7 single districts and 3 at large. That came out last week. Or since we want odd numbers, maybe 4 at large or something like that.
I think what, frankly, it's going to take some education and some little realization on the part of nice thinking people like yourself, Barbara, to realize you are not going to have just exactly your cup of tea. And I think that's just it. You're going to have to get around the table, you're going to have to vote yes, you're going to have to vote no. You can't have it all. Right?
Because it's a very valid point, as has been brought up, that if you have too many more than 11, your debate is going to go on forever. And the length of meetings is going to have to, by nature, be longer because you're going to be dealing with city problems or within that geographical area, which is now the city, as well as all of that which is outside the city, and you're going to have to take the bulk of the work done by the council and the bulk of the work done by the assembly and add that all together to come up with how much time it's going to take. Sure. I certainly would never run for that body.
Are there other questions of Mr. Keller? Yes, Jane?
Yeah, I have a whole lot of questions about the steering committee, and I'm just wondering if you're going to come back to us sometime so we can talk about it some more, rather than deal with it at 11 o'clock at night. I think somebody has to do that function. I don't think those people should. I didn't mean to be real bloody.
Because they want to come with this.
Yeah.
Except for the domain.
Anyone else be heard? Would you care to be heard?
Just for 1 minute, frankly, I hope you people come up with a charter that passes, which I'm Gary Thurlow, borough attorney, but I hope your charter passes, and I think probably what you have to do to come up with a charter that passes is not to rock anybody's boats, as far as use Ernest Wisky's words, and not go over anybody's sacred cows, and not rock Barbara's rattle her cage.
I mean, a blank sheet of paper.
No, I think you've got to stick to the known and familiar, including the service areas, because this is the known and familiar, and this is a system that protects people in Hillside from having to increase their taxes unless they vote for it. I'm very optimistic about how the transition will go. Certainly, the 2 departments of law, I'm sure, can be merged very easily, very successfully. I know John Spencer shares that view with me. We merged our prosecutor's office 2 months ago. We saved about $30,000 doing it. And both Alan Bailey, the borough prosecutor, and Ron Sisson, the city prosecutor, is very happy.
that they're able to work much more effectively together than they are able to do singly. We're sharing rent. We're saving a lot of rent. It's a very successful arrangement. I've thought about what would have to say to one of our biggest departments, the Department of Public Works, how it might work if merged with the city Department of Public Works. The city department lost Herman DeSelka, who was a great public works manager. He went back to Texas. We lost Butch West to Dickinson Oswald, who's a great public works manager. We got Jim Swing. His replacement came from the city, who's Dale Merrill. And then we lost our head of roads and maintenance, who was a good man. He went to private industry, where he will make more money. And his replacement, we got from the city managers. I think that department, if merged, will work out very well. I don't think you have to worry about a surplus of public works directors and section heads and so forth. There's not going to be any surplus. You're going to be hard put to get enough qualified people to staff just one department, much less two. I think the transition will go really quite smoothly, and I think that each of the departments will be much better. My particular axe to grind has always been Parks and Recreation. That's an area I've always been very enthusiastic about. And I find it particularly frustrating that if you want to pursue a Park and Recreation matter, you have to pursue it either with the City Parks and Recreation Commission and stop at Farweed Lane, if you're talking about the bike trail or something like that, or you have to pursue it with Borough Park and Recreation Commission and stop at 36th Avenue. You're talking about that area around Lake Otis Lake. You run into these roadblocks constantly, and you lose enthusiasm and frustrated. A combined Park and Recreation Department with the experience that the city has in recreation programs and the experience the Borough Department has in just plain old land acquisition and park planning will yield a really great Park and Recreation Department, and you'll get the same job done with less people. I know we in the Department of Law will get the same job done with less people who have one less municipal attorney, for one thing.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any questions?
Mr. Thurlow has reminded us that one man's meat is another man's Persian.
Another question. Thank you for coming out here to the office. It really is appreciated because it's a lot easier to come here to give our input than
This is such a big district that next go around we'll probably have to go down to Diamond. But we appreciate all you folks coming out. Now, is there anybody else that wishes to be heard tonight? Recognizing our Carl.
I know in my own departments that I work out of that we're not replacing him. We have lots of not replacing him. We're going to go through summer with less land. It might be pretty hard cut at times. We might have to have temporary help. But as far as replacing permanent slots, which is more or less what I am, they're not being done.
Why? In preparation for unification?
Well, and over the cost now.
I see.
There's no particular point, and most of you know I'm back here and just walking around in the winter doing what people want to do. But there is not too big a demand for inspectors in wintertime. In summertime, and good when the construction season on. It's very possible. Now this is just my version of it. This is not the borough's setup. But it's very possible, I believe, that this want to keep an eye on all year long. Wow. I wish we could have two more inspectors, all we need, but might not be around.
Mr. Burton?
Just one parting shot of the plan. I agree with you completely, Frank, that we shouldn't legislate in the charter. But the plan isn't legislation, basically.
I'll consult with my attorney. Is there anyone else here who'd like to be heard? If not, we appreciate every one of you coming. We've enjoyed it. And we might not totally agree with you in some areas, but we're certainly going to consider what you have said, and it's certainly going to slant what we do and think. And we appreciate, again, the fact that you came tonight. This hearing is adjourned. No, we have the hearing is adjourned, but we have a little bit of meeting left. We're done. But we're not.
Not necessarily because it's all over.
We're not done yet. Hearing is over.
You're welcome to stay for the meeting.
Let's go. Is there any unfinished business? There's hearing no mention of unfinished business. Is there any new business? Jane?
I want to know if the polling and research subcommittee is interested in meeting with a thing called the Urban Observatory, which is a group of people at the university who have received a HUD grant to try and combine some academic pursuits with local units of government, and they want to talk to us about the things they can do for us in relation to research for free, and want to know if they can talk to at least a subcommittee or the full commission sometime next week. If the subcommittee met with them on Tuesday morning, then we can come back to the full commission and say what they've got to offer at least.
Super.
Tuesday morning?
Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock at the university.
Am I on?
10:30. Let's see.
10:30 is okay. The idea was that you could go through lunch. Okay. The Urban Observatory is a HUD-funded program, and Anchorage competed with everybody in the country, and there were only 10 grants given, and they're one of them. So.
Great. Lisa, did you have a question? Mary. Lisa's next on the list.
How about, we'll meet in Gary Pose's office.
Can we get Lisa on the floor? She asked for it.
Oh, let them finish.
Huh?
Let them finish.
Okay, fine.
The subcommittee is the polling and research, and or anybody else who wants to come in. You got to speak up.
Get her a throat mic.
Yeah.
Where?
10:30 where?
Okay, Gary Pose's office is in the new building on the 3rd floor.
New classroom building?
Yeah, I don't know where we're going to meet, but I know that's who we want to talk to, so let's meet there.
That's Tuesday morning.
Is that the one with the auditorium in part of it?
No, next to the library.
It's right next to the library. The new building.
The consortium library?
The rusty one.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's the agenda.
He's on the 3rd floor in public administration.
Join it anyway.
Now, Lisa?
Lisa?
If anybody cares to meet with the executive directors of the ADEA, they will meet with us 4:15 Wednesday the 26th. That's their own.
Wednesday the 26th. We have a hearing that night, just so
At 6.
And where are their offices?
1515 Tudor Road.
That's the teachers.
East Tudor. Just east of the New Deerland store.
I noticed that by the sign. Mostly because I don't think it's that.
Is there other new business?
Not, well, wait, Mr. Chairman, yeah. All right, I want to mention it again. I think we ought to make a point of getting together with the council, the assembly, and the school board. And I think we ought to do that soon.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
And I think we can do it perhaps on luncheon meetings. I think it's largely a courtesy, but I think it's a courtesy we ought to extend, and we ought to do it very soon.
I agree.
I agree 100%.
Could you schedule something, Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection amongst the commission?
Here, here.
What do?
Thank you.
Do we have That's a good question.
I'll ask Sherry Holmes if she has anything on charter production. I know they're meeting tomorrow.
Just that we're meeting tomorrow at noon in Dick Fisher's office, and all the details are on the sheet I gave you yesterday, and anyone is welcome to come.
There will be coffee. Sanka. There will be Sanka.
You're supposed to bring
Mr. Parsons,
bring Dick a lunch. Chairman, I'd like to report first on office space. Ellie Walters and I looked over Dr. O'Malley's old office, where I will be till the middle of next month. There's room for both of us. We've come to a tentative agreement with it belongs to Mrs. O'Malley, and the thing that is a little bit up in the air is the fact that it is in the process of being sold. There is a deal in the making. I talked with the dealees, and they are on the plane and gone to Seattle about some financing. They do not plan to be bulldozing the building off the property until late summer, i.e. September. So if we do it one round, we're in. If not, we're going to be looking for quarter, because they think tentatively that they will be clearing the thing and pouring foundation before frost is what they hope to do. I would still recommend it. You were given permission from the commission to go ahead. We have made, I did not make any written agreement, but we have agreed that we would pay $300, including one parking place, and that we probably should rent another parking place in that lot for $20.
If there's no objection from the commission, I believe we should do so also.
Can we move in right away?
If you let me shovel a bit, we figured Monday, Connie and I, that...
I'd like to have, I may take things in over the weekend, but basically we're going to go on Monday, possibly without telephone.
I'll get a key.
Then we will have an office Monday morning.
Yes.
In your present office for however long we can retain it.
There is no Xerox in the building.
It's only, 4 blocks to the bank, but I don't know if that's something the bank has offered or not. That was one of my priorities.
It's 2 blocks.
2 blocks?
No problem, Mr. Chairman. My only concern is we're going to get going on things like glossaries of terms and digest of cases and preliminary drafts and all this stuff. It really is important to have a Xerox and a typewriter, and preferably a MGST type as soon as possible. That's just, I'm not sure what the schedule is on those things, but
as fast as possible.
Now, those details I feel are the responsibility of our new executive.
You've delegated, I take it. And you, Evie, can you accept those responsibilities?
Absolutely, I already have.
We talked about that, Mr. Chairman, that I'll firm the contract up and get it to the lawyer if we need to in whatever arrangement. Now, we checked with the civil defense on furniture and the like, and it so happens that Ellie has an inn. Her father is staked mucky-muck in surplus something. And so she's already initiated some contacts that are getting this thing. Evidently, a file cabinet may be the most difficult thing to get, and one commission member said that he would try and scrounge something.
How about a Xerox?
I'm scrounged on a file cabinet.
Xerox machine is difficult to scrounge. We can lease a Xerox, can't we?
All right, across the front,
I don't think it's too expensive. Why don't you call the Epeco people? Call the Epeco people.
Not all rented, and consequently, more than 2 of the spaces would be available to us. I think it is thought that probably they will rent this season because of the construction of that parking lot there, which will eliminate a number of parking spaces in that area.
Mr. Chairman, I got an idea. I don't think the public could criticize me too much. I've got 2 Xerox machines in our office building that have what's called an Autotron, and you stick them in and make copies. Now, that's a little running back and forth. It's about 5 blocks. But that might be a salvation for you. We can just get you an Autotron. You can chalk up. It's kind of like a meter reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can rent those.
You can rent them from
You can lease
Epeco
those.
on a monthly basis.
You can lease anything you want.
Well, the thing is, this is a 7,000 or 4,000. The 7,000's got a collator on it.
Right, you can't rent one.
You can't rent those.
Maybe we need the dual service.
I don't know.
A small Xerox would fit.
That's an offer.
I think the sense of information is get with it and do what's necessary to do the job so you can be effective
Yes,
and
because
productive.
I have no concept of what our budget is, or whether we have one. And I've worked with nonprofit organizations for a nonprofit salary for too long.
You don't have our budget?
No. I haven't been given much of anything.
Are there any other commission member comments? Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Chairman, the committee met with, is this on the same topic or you want to go?
Oh, I was just going to tell Abby about something that she might want to talk about. Sue Butler in finance.
Mr. Chairman, I talked to Mike Rowan today, and I had suggested to him earlier, and he agreed it would be a good idea and suggested I present it to the commissioners, that we all have had enough input into they have field tested it, and there seem to be a couple questions that require their poll takers to be very careful with it, but he says it's a usable document. He suggests, and I agree, that we all take it self-administered, that we should know enough to self-administer without names on it. We'd like to keep I suggested all 11 of us, plus the attorney and the executive secretary, take it, and he would keep those in a separate sort thing. Is that agreeable?
I'm not superstitious, but could we throw in the recording secretary and make it 14 instead of 15?
Well, I thought of it too. And he'll give it to us, he's going to bring it tomorrow, and it was suggested that perhaps Evie needs some work with us on things like budget and everything. I was wondering if there was a work session time that she could work with us, and I suggested that we have a meeting down at the new offices, which means we probably should wait till after Monday morning.
When would be a convenient time for the commission to have a relatively short meeting at the new offices? I think it can be relatively short.
Mr. Chairman, wouldn't that be possible to be done by you, and then if there are questions, I really with a tremendous schedule, and unless this is something where we need to iron out policy, I really think it could be a matter between you and possibly Mr. Josephson.
And after next week, we can all...
And actually, a lot of it may be ironed out if I see that they're going to have all the subcommittee meetings, you know, like in the next week or two, just sitting in the house will expand my experience.
Are you going to be there tomorrow?
Someone asked me about square footage. It depends on how much of that building we happen to flow into. It's, I think, flexible enough space that we are getting good space. The minimum you could figure we have is about 250 square feet, but I suspect we could be using 400, 450, including the waiting room kind of thing.
I think it's flexible enough to be useful.
Chairman, just one more item here. I do have a contract here that Mike Rowan brought over. I looked it over, and it seems to me to embody the terms that Mike and the commission talked about when he made his presentation, and to protect us adequately. And Mike is in something of a hurry, I guess, to get signed because he is in the field and he's working up invoices and so forth. I'm not sure what the line of authority is on this point, whether the chairman has been designated by the commission as the sign-or for things of this sort, or whether it takes commission action. What?
Mr. Chairman, I move that